Okay, here we are.
Okay, we're live with Adam and Kate.
Hello, everybody.
Say hi, Adam and Kate.
Hello.
So for people just tuning in and for those that are returning, let's reiterate the message and have it new for people that are just dropping into the stream. Basically, we're creating some fiction here. And my good friends, Kate and Adam, they're diligent, hardworking engineers that have a company that is absolutely epiphenomenal. This is why the series is called Epiphenomenal and
Epic, right?
Epic. This is, you guys hear it first on this show. It's epic. You know what? We'll do it again because the thing was, they didn't understand how I was bringing that. So we got ENTA, which is
Epic.
Come on, okay. I gotta do it one more time. I feel like we're back in a class of, I don't know, when did you teachers try and prompt you to the time?
Yeah.
Right. Hello, Mr.
Yeah.
Sanderson. Oh, there you go. Here we go.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and what is your company all about?
Epicness.
We help other companies become perpetually epic.
Yes,
What the hell does that
Today
mean?
we're going to have some fun here.
Mm.
We're
Right.
continuing on the science fiction piece, right?
Yeah.
So people who were last week watching, they would actually see that Kate did this really sultry sort of like,
Sultry?
well, I don't know, it seemed like, you said silky or something, didn't you?
Yeah. What was the word?
Velvety. Okay, see, this is the problem with the mnemonics, right? So what happened is I go, okay, because you can imagine, I think, well, I used the word sultry, that came to mind, right? So what can you imagine I would think of that's related to sultry, right? Now, but there's Kate who hears that word and thinks, sultry? What does that mean? Was I sultry in the middle of the night, right? I mean...
At
You
4
did-
a.m. No one's sultry at 4 a.m.
Oh, now it's 4. It was 4:30. Now it's 4. Changes every time you tell it.
It gets earlier every time.
Yeah. But
So this is the female version of the fishing story. It just seems to change.
yes, that's right. Right. What's I gonna fish this
It's like the
big?
formation of a legend, right?
Well, this week's voiceover, not gonna lie, took me a lot of work. I had to research. I had to time it. I don't know how many takes, and then I had to cut it all. So anyway, we'll see how it comes out. I didn't watch it yet.
Well,
Yeah, I didn't watch it yet.
we're gonna see how it comes out, yes. But in the spirit of transparency, right?
Mm.
Because we're having this conversation in terms of self-discovery. So I believe there was something barbarous at the end of this delivery that Adam said, "Hey, I think we should, chat about this because it's a little difficult, is it?"
Yeah, it is. It is hard, like doing these voiceovers. Like Dan gives us a series of images in a video format that's like 2 to 3 minutes long, and then we got to figure out what message you had in your head. And now we see if the message I interpreted and then voiced over is the same as when you created it. And it's a pretty cool exercise. It's not easy. But
well, let me.
It's not easy because we don't know some of the references you're throwing in, so there's a little bit of research to do. But I thought I would cheat and get ahead, but then I realized that his has similar images to one of my videos that is coming up the next week coming, and so now I have to wait to see what his is so that I don't overlap messaging. It's like, ooh, you don't even let me cheat and get ahead. I have to wait.
But see how the meta works. And this is the idea of a philosophical relational database of propagation. Now, the one heuristic that I want to give you guys that you guys can make your process simpler is in that 2-part process that you described. You thought, what is Dan thinking? Don't even worry about it. This is advice that, not only do I give new creators on the Plankset platform, but I also, I'm trying to encourage you guys to use as thinkers and creators yourself, right? So almost think of it as a state of meditation. I'm just going to use it how you want, but you listen to it and start thinking of the things that come to mind, right? Now, buttress that with exactly what Kate was doing is go on that learning journey, pull up Wikipedia, or pull up the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I think that's what it is, right? At Stanford, great articles. It's kind of like taking intellectual anesthesia. You start up at the top, you're really excited, like the anesthesiologist, if you guys have been in an operation, right? It's like, we're going to count down to 10, and I always say, fuck it, I'm going to beat it. I'm going to get to 11, you bastard. Right? Damn it, I'm going to 10, 9, 8, 7.
Yeah.
Right? We can't help ourselves. And so I guess the point that I was trying to make is that in some of these articles, like, you'll start on that, but what a rabbit hole. And I just say, you know what? That's your judgment then, when to pull the ripcord. Right? But do it.
All right. Well, let's pull the cord. I want to see it. Let's see.
Let's do it.
Oh, you want to see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Anticipation is killing me.
Genre of fiction with her famous story, Frankenstein. However, it wasn't until over 100 years later, in 1926, that the publisher Hugo Gernsback popularized the term science fiction with his ongoing publication, Amazing Stories. It was the first magazine devoted solely to science fiction, including the works of the great Jules Verne, 1828 to 1905, H.G. Wells, 1866 to 1946, and Edgar Allan Poe, 1809 and 1849. Perhaps best known for his horror writing and dark poetry, Edgar Allan Poe also wrote science fiction stories, the most notable of which may be The Unparalleled Adventures of One's Hans Befall, relating a man's balloon journey to the moon with a combination of scientific precision and astonishing fantasy. Jules Verne was a French novelist, poet, and playwright. He is famous for his creation of the Voyages Extraordinaires, a series of best-selling adventure novels including Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Around the World in 80 Days. His novels are always very well documented and generally set in the second half of the 19th century and always take into account the technological advances of the time. In short, he imagined the future as buildable and practical. H.G. Wells, considered by many to be the father of science fiction, is famous for The Time Machine, Invisible Man, and War of the Worlds, believed that human experience was at the center of science fiction. Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, in fact, disagreed on the philosophies of science fiction. I do not see the possibility of comparison between his work and mine. We do not proceed in the same manner. It occurs to me that his stories do not repose on very scientific basis. No, there is no rapport between his work and mine. I make use of physics, he invents. I go to the moon in a cannonball discharged from a cannon. There is no invention. He goes to Mars in an airship, which he constructs of a metal which goes away with the law of gravitation. But show me this metal. Let him produce it. H.G. Wells believed that a fantastical leap was fine as long as it was grounded in the human experience. The interest he invoked was a practical one. He wrote and believed and told that this or that thing could be done, which was not at all at that time done. He helped his reader to imagine it done and to realize what fun, excitement, or mischief would ensue. Many of his inventions have come true, but these stories of mine do not pretend to deal with possible things. They are exercises of the imagination in a quite different field. Which do you believe?
There you go.
Yeah. So now you know.
What do you think?
Love it. Now you know.
All right.
Now you know. Now you know.
I did enjoy the, the competing philosophies about what fiction should be. Should it be something that's like achievable, at least by today's standards in terms of we imagine, or do we take something like H.G. Wells that says, whatever, build a time machine, but then write about the human experience around the time machine, and why does it matter? I thought that was intriguing.
Yeah. What do you think, Kate?
I have a really strong opinion on this one, actually.
Oh, goodness.
I think that Jules Verne, who really wanted to base everything on scientific principle, would not have been able to imagine a world that we have today. So he has limited his ability to portray possible, inventions, because he hasn't thought outside of the box, outside of the realm, where H.G. Wells was able to think outside of that box, right? Because he was imagining the impossible. And it might not have been exactly the way that, one could get there, right? Obviously. But thinking outside of the box, I think, is where you really start to create the impossible, right?
I have to really applaud that, actually, assessment, Kate, right? So from a I want to tell you where the value of that philosophical insight is. When you think about what you're advocating for, you're advocating for something that is, in some way we'll say, not real, a metaphysics, an imagined sort of futurity, right? Okay? This is a huge divide philosophically. Huge, right? It's, on one side, it's not real, this kind of thing, right? But the proof that you're offering, okay, this is how dramatic it is that you're framing it this way, it follows that principle of hindsight is 2020. So it gets us further down the pathway, so to speak. We can turn around and look back and say, oh yes, there was no perceived way to get there using a purely deterministic system, right? So this is kind of the idea, is that there is at least some room for, right, some imagination and some creativity in the journey that we're taking. And that is really, really interesting. That's a really interesting insight and something that I hope we build on in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's,
right.
There's a... I think,
well, even if you look at the divide between Adam and I... So, sorry, Adam, I'll just throw this in quick. Like, Adam is heavily sci-fi and the, like, Star Trek.
Choose your words carefully.
Oh, right.
But just to let you know, Adam's not.
Yeah. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
It's actually not real.
What? Okay, but he's really like more into the Star Trek, Star Wars, stuff like that, and I really, my like fantastical genre is like, Harry Potter, Twilight, True Blood. Like, I love that sort of like totally not even in this realm of laws of physics, nature, what we know today kind of thing. And so it's an interesting blend for us to come together and write a book.
There you go.
Wow. Yeah. So do we have to, like, in a preemptive sort of strike, we have to actually, come up with how do we resolve dispute? I guess what is the nature of the dispute?
Well, Adam's a black belt, so I'm going to say not physical.
Okay, deal.
Black belt? You got to tell us more on that. You can't leave us hanging with a black belt.
Sure. When I was 12, my dad worked with a girl whose brother was a Muay Thai world champion, and he said, "Hey, give us a lesson sometime." So we went down, and he gave us a lesson and showed us some cool moves, and I thought it was pretty much the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And now here, 27 years later, I've never stopped going. So I learned a lot in that period of time. And so for anyone who doesn't know what Muay Thai is, in UFC, it's the stand-up part where they punch and kick and knee and elbow each other. So yeah, that's my story. And I competed for a while, but my wife is the true champion. That's how I met my wife, actually. She was a world champion and traveled the world beating up people. So...
So from
really
that,
don't also
yeah.
No, the whole family. Are the kids doing it too?
A little bit. We teach them in the basement during this whole predicament. We've been running lessons with them just to kind of keep them active and keep them interested. But they think it's pretty fun.
Now, is it just a Hollywood cliche that you go around kicking trees for your training? Like to build your shin strength up and stuff like that?
Like Van Damme. In Thailand, I think they actually do that. They're crazy over there. But we do have, there are bags in the gym that are filled with like sand. So they feel like concrete. So you can very lightly like tap your shin on it over and over and over to toughen up the the skin and kind of kill all the nerves. Because in Muay Thai, you do a lot of shin on shin banging and things like that, and it hurts. So, but it hurts good.
Okay,
you know?
Well, that's it. Yeah, so we've got a security detail in
That's
this
right.
sort of.
Caitlin's the brains, I'm the brawn.
Yeah,
It's always been that way. Yeah.
I think you're both Adam.
So,
I'm just the sultry spice we add in.
that's right. The 4:30, like.
Oh yeah. So now you're both conscious about this like sultry business, right?
Yeah.
And now you got another voiceover to do.
So-
You're building that up yourself.
So Dan,
There's this thread of this causality that you
Yeah.
know is tied to identity, and it's like.
so I feel like my voiceover needs a label now, Dan. What are you gonna call my voiceover?
Huh?
I feel as though my voiceover now needs a, if Caitlin is sultry, what would you call mine?
This is a Hegelian trap, okay? And so Hegel, what he liked to do, no, but hear me out. It's just, and it's not an absolute. It's just that's what came to mind was
Yeah.
the concept of a Hegelian trap. So we're putting two competing things together where it's not a competing thing. I'm not talking about an imagined sense or a causal sense. What I'm saying, actually, I'm talking about an imagined sense. So I can honestly say to myself that I have a characterization that was thinking of with Adam, right? And it was actually a little bit more, but I'll bring it up in a second.
Okay.
Then we've already established what we were talking about with the sultry business, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't logically follow that it's a characteristic opposite of what Kate is, right? Or I could spend some time and think about it and assign that label, right? But the thing that I wanted to make as a suggestion, and this is for Adam on his last voiceover, and then also for Kate on future voiceovers, is it's going to be increasingly difficult if the realm from which you narrate is based entirely on, well, not based entirely, if you're filling it with biographical types of things, right? So you'll realize that as you're seeing those images, in terms of like kind of causal sort of things or things you've seen before, there's only really a finite number of ways you can kind of take that narration. However, if you open up the doors of creativity, you know, so to speak, I'm just giving a metaphor because there's no door in there, you know, into the homunculized sort of brain or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So there's this idea here that you have to, you can be completely creative with it. You did a great job, by the way, but I'm saying you can be really creative. So as you're going through that creative process, number one, don't think about what I was thinking. That shouldn't come through your mind at all. Freeform associate with what's dropping in front of you, right? And then also realize that you don't have to narrate the quote. That's a restriction, right? You could say something completely different than the quote. You could, so just there's no limitations is all I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Challenge accepted. I love it.
Right?
Be free, little bird. Be free.
Yeah.
And besides that, we talked about like, Adam, didn't we have a conversation where we said that you'd be a good audio book reader?
You did say that.
Yeah. We've already established, Kate, that the sultry voice is out. When it comes time that this voice is going online for the audiobook, it's going to be, it's Adam.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay. I'm the audiobook reader.
Wait a minute. Or there's an option in the publishing industry we can dramatize the voices, right? So we could have like Adam playing a character and then Kate playing a character.
We could do that.
I like that. She can be the crazy character.
Right?
A world of possibilities.
Yeah.
That's right. So,
Or we have a voice off.
A voice off.
voice off.
Ooh.
Yeah, maybe our readers and our viewers decide whose voice gets to narrate the book by the end of this podcast series.
That's
There
a
you
great
go.
idea.
There you go. Okay.
One of the things that I'm trying to do, and notice this subtle sort of like, but it's a very authentic way. I'm going to leave a section after we're done recording for 15 seconds. Okay, so we scratch our chin and we say, why is he doing that? Right? Well, on YouTube, there's an ability to bring in these other like things that you can click on afterwards. And fortunately or unfortunately, we haven't taken advantage of that. There's something like writing in the margins of a book that I don't want to have a pop-up show up on Kate's or Adam's face, right? I just don't like that. So when we say end stream, or we're going to end today's episode, I'm going to let it continue to record without us on the canvas, so to speak, for 15 seconds before I ixnay the action A, right? Then we have this ability to have, either have this video linked to the next one in the series, or see, we decide, like we talked about before, let's have a guest on that has their own sort of, segue or thought about a particular subject, right?
Yeah, super excited for that. Hopefully our first guest next week, maybe.
Hopefully. Trying. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good. So what were we focusing on with that fellow? I forget his name.
His name's Jan. He's an architect. So we were kind of trying to imagine how in the future, if things are much more virtual and there's a much more interactive virtual environment, how that might change the architects of where we live and work. So I think it'll be an interesting thought experiment for somebody trained in the history of architecture. And he even says he's got a special stylus he can sketch right on screen with us. So
wow, okay.
That should be cool.
So I'm going to start something here that I would say that is going on with Adam and Kate, that while you're paying attention, and we're all in this conversation with this fellow, right? And so what that would be is building on the theme that we heard from the little clip video, is that the way the 2020 perspective works, looking back on, where we've come from, say we were in, 2600 looking back at 2020, we realize that even the best of minds are going to have a certain sort of limitation. And as we keenly listen to, what he's talking about, want all of us to kind of think, from that sort of, that mind space, to think that there's a whole world of possibilities that are related to that somewhat, but how many degrees of separation and how different can it unfold? It's really, really, really interesting way of thinking about it, right?
Okay.
Like, I imagine, what if we were to have something like a severe restriction on resources? So this would be, from a Darwinian standpoint, this would be like a real pivot point in history for like an evolutionary sort of punctuation, as we like to call it. The thing that was kind of dismissed, I guess, but I just like the terminology, right? I think it's pretty much out of favor, this punctuated equilibrium sort of theory. I don't know where it sits evolutionary.
It's interesting you bring that up, Dan. We actually, we talked about this the last time, we started a timeline, right? Like what happens 50 years from now, 100 years, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, where our book is taking place. And one of the major events or like headlines in one of the years is actually all mining of resources on Earth is banned. And it's only intergalactical mining, like other planets. Another planetary mining is how we are sustaining ourselves. So it actually reaches a point where we don't allow it on our planet.
But it's interesting cultural scenarios that can arise there, right? Because if resources get scarce, then if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people that might be higher up on the hierarchy, they start to drop down, right? And what happens, right? When all of a sudden, before you were worried about, call it first world problems, and now you're worried about starving or energy or whatever. So, I think it's, good to take a moment and reflect, like, well, what does that world look like? Like, there's pockets of, not everything's sunshine and roses, right? It doesn't matter what the future is. It's not Star Trek where we've kind of solved all the problems, right? It's messier, So what does that look like? And if you're in space on a space station, air becomes a currency, right? Things like that. So, it makes me think of Christopher Nolan's movie Interstellar, when they're talking about time as a resource, when they're going near the black hole and like weighing their options, right? Your scenario can change, and stuff that is worthless, well, not worthless, but taken for granted, all of a sudden becomes like a plot driver, or it's very important.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I want to throw a bit of a surprise into the mix here, right? You guys are like,
That's like surprise face. There you go.
Yeah. Like, I can't get any more surprised. I'm already surprised.
Okay, hit us.
In addition to the homework of voiceover, Kate, and then this is a shared project, okay?
Yeah.
Here it is. This is a YouTube channel of Jordan Peterson, okay? And there's this lady. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her first name right, but it's Yeonmi Park.
Okay.
Have you guys heard of her before?
No.
Okay. What I would like you guys to do is to watch that video for next week.
Okay.
This was such an impactful video as a young woman's struggle from North Korea. So Jordan Peterson interviews her about her struggle into China, her partial integration into South Korea, and eventually being picked up for a book publishing deal by Penguin Random House. Wow. So I think she really shines a light on some of the issues that we seem to be preoccupied with, is all I'm going to say. So watch the video, and we'll chat about it next week. Okay. I won't do that a lot, but that's how impactful I think the video will be. At least it was for me.
Right. Okay. I'm
in. All right. Back to the book. Where are we at right now for readers on the book, right? We're still in early stages for sure, but how would you describe where you guys are at in the creative process?
I think we're exploring themes still, right? I think we're starting to slowly crystallize, I think, the purpose, the story it wants to tell, and the meaning behind it, and kind of, how fantastical does it need to be? How much realism is there going to be? Like, and we had kind of, to really ground it, had kind of settled on this idea of an opening scene where the main character like wakes up and describing that process, and waking up inside with a simulated sunrise versus actually going outside and excuse me. Wow.
That's you.
Actually going outside and seeing a real sunset, and contrasting those two, and that contrast being a metaphor for the transformation that this character goes under. So I think that was kind of our starting point, where we were like, okay, we need to really nail this opening scene, because it's going to set the stage for important things later on.
Yeah. And we've talked about like little scenes where like ideas or pivotal moments have happened, and we've flushed out like little scenes, like kind of on the key, I would call them like major event headline pieces, right? But there's some things that we haven't flushed out yet. Like, what does this character's actual company do? Right? We know that he's a senior leader, right? And we know that he's fairly well off. But we don't know exactly what they do yet. We've thought about it, we've talked about it, but like we haven't, like there's details of that we haven't honed in yet. But we have talked about like some major instances and things that happen along his journey, right? So we have like a very high level plot to the whole book.
Well,
a whole bunch of subplots that have potential of growing.
Yeah,
and maybe you consider for the person's job.
Yeah.
Well, think of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, right? And so we've already established that there's going to be no more mining, but you have to think, how do we weave that into the storyline?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So if the character and the interaction, if this is the environment that she actually gets to work from, I think there's ways to write into the story the concepts of where she, actually works in, and especially fill in a backstory about what's going on in the environment, right? So she could be a research scientist, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, and I actually kind of thought, like, does it matter? Like, we can describe the working environment, the people you interact with.
She or he or whatever. We haven't established a he or a she, right?
Sure. But in terms of, like, the actual industry or the job, like, does it matter? Do we have to say? Can we just leave that unspoken? We can describe the environment, the interactions, the people, the strategy, because this ultimately is a business book, right? So does it matter if they're a space mining company or a space marketing company or whatever? Maybe that can be one of the
institutional research, or if it's actual company. We're not trying to really plan a future that says it's a utopia with no companies, right?
Mm-hmm. So
that's really cool. So you got to be able to make it so that it's kind of like a microcosm. Well, there's this interesting thing that I've been framing. There's a cosmology. If you look at like Christian symbology, right? Or symbolic sort of symbols. You look like a cosmology on one side. On the other side, you have microcosm, which is basically like the individual Kate or Adam experience, right? Connected from your brain to your brainstem, right? It's however you envision consciousness. So there's that gap between the whole sort of big realm of things, big picture, and then, what our society does. And then there's the individual microcosm, right? So basically what we're saying is that the idea of culture for an organization means that there's just one level above that is kind of like small group interactions, right? And so maybe the company, generic company descriptor of the company of the future are ones that work in, dynamic models, small groups sort of things, right? Like, we put groups of people together that are 15 to 20 people instead of like huge groups of 200 or 400, right? I don't know, right? That's one way to kind of look at, how, like, what is the size of the group that they're involved with, right?
Yeah, and this is actually an interesting thing because they're already talking about like future state of companies being no longer huge, massive companies anymore, right? They're already talking about that sort of like small group, partnership collective being a potential path for the future economy already.
Right.
Which is kind of what I think you're touching on here, which is a really interesting kind of philosophy of like, what does that breakdown look like versus the whole like monopoly, which we've historically have seen a lot of, right? Especially telecommunications and particularly in Canada. It's like heavily monopolized, large companies just own the industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, what does the future in our book look like? We're not sure what things that we've talked about. Like, so we've talked about different aspects. We like not actually labeling what it is that they do because it's not the point. It's the journey that the company takes through the leadership change and through this individual's journey that is the story. And the point is that it's transferable. It's not industry specific. It's not company specific. It's not size specific, right? These are business aspects that if any company does today, 600 years in the future, it's going to drive the right behaviors. And so I think there's a really good value, like to Adam saying, like maybe we never mention what it is they do. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think that's a good starting point. Let's at least, try and, create the visuals around, so we have to say what kind of emotions. We go back to the waking up sort of analogy again. And of course, I mean, I easily can put in, I can use the waking up metaphors and the sun on your face and the shared human experience of that being euphoric in a way, right? I mean, it's just like sunsets, people are drawn towards like heliotropic magnets, right? Like we can't help but like and enjoy the sun, right? It's
Well,
Did you see my sunrise this morning?
oh yeah, on Instagram. Keelan
I posted
time lapse
on
the
Instagram
sunrise.
my beautiful sunrise.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a cool idea.
So I guess your point is that I can do the metaphor speaking, right, or writing, but then from that I would say probably focus on process, right? Like something that this person is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
For like, let's do a particular day in the life of so and so, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that kind of speaks to what's going on, right? Every movie has the opening scene, right, where it's just kind of setting the tone and the stage and the characters and all that kind of stuff, right? Because you made me think of something, Dan, right? In our world we imagined, you're kind of chipped in and it can regulate your sleep, so you can sleep like 3 hours and be totally refreshed. And then it can like wake you up, and instead of that like groggy kind of, zombies kind of slither out of bed, you're kind of, yeah, you're up. Everyone's a morning person, right? And then, maybe the systems, play some nice music that slowly gets louder, and maybe your wall simulates a sunrise, and it's meant to be like very charming and very inviting. But if this has become like habitual or whatever, it would mean nothing to you. It might even be an annoyance when you wake up. You're like, turn it off. Like, I'm not interested, right? Because you don't have the emotional impact of sitting in front of a real Santorini sunset, right? That might be an interesting place to play.
Yeah. Well, I agree, but one thing that's a hang up for me is I like the technology of you kind of plug in and you accelerate or make your sleeping experience more efficient. Mm-hmm. Okay. The issue and the hang up on the narrative that I have for that is that it needs to somehow connect these two dots. It needs to connect the dots that, from a scientific standpoint in sleep studies, they're saying that I think it's around 5 to 6 hours into sleep is when you enter REM sleep, which is that real spindle washing kind of healing, dream state that's required for like a regenerative kind of process. So either we have to figure out how
it induces that immediately.
And here's the beauty about language, or we can literally just make the claim and say we wave the magic wand, that's the reality, or we spend chapters and chapters explaining how we do it. Right? So
are we gonna H.G. Wells this shit or Vernon?
That's right. Right. You just say it was, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
It's up for you to figure out. I'm an engineer by trade. I don't want to do it in my own book. Screw off.
I think though,
I'm a Wells girl.
I think you can, it's not really a middle ground, but you can say, and it accelerates and if we did a little research, we could create 2 or 3 sentences that use like the right terminology that tells the reader like sciencey, okay, and they move on, right? It's not just like, it accelerates your sleep state. It gives a little bit of intelligence behind it.
Fall into that trap. You realize that everyone's going to shake their finger at you and say, show, don't tell. So remember, we're doing this process. You're going to tell, and then I'm going to try and show it.
Okay, fair.
Right.
Yep.
The key is that we've got to weave it in there so that, and you'll notice it when it weaves in. You'll be like, oh, yes, okay.
Okay.
Right? You've got that has to show the journey, right? You have to go from the description into the storytelling.
Okay.
Right.
So
bullet list, right? That's what we're going to work on.
Right.
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
So we got to maybe okay. Well, let's just go with for the sake of moving this forward. Let's just go with we're gonna magic wand this one. That's how it works, right?
You know what? This is actually a really good point because you can magic wand stuff, and then you can always go back and produce, explanations.
Mm-hmm.
It might be easier to passive the magic wand. That way, the minutia and the details don't change the trajectory of the theme, which it does complicate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say Harry Potter away.
Yeah.
Wingardium Leviosa.
Right? I mean, first draft, right? You may look at it and go, this is too, hairy fairy. So we're going to, put a little bit more scientific reasoning in there, right?
And I imagine there's a balance, right? If we get us along a certain path and realize we've waged this magic wand a lot, a few spots we should go back and sciencey it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
No one's gonna believe that we're engineers. No one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, yes, for now we'll magic wand this. We obviously have to do maybe a little research or get some input from a person who's has more insight into the chemical process that your body goes through in reaching that deep REM sleep. Because the idea is that it would induce it immediately. We'll figure the how out as we go. But the crux is that shit's hitting the fan at work with this character. And so he skips his sleep cycle to take on more meetings, okay? And the reason why this is super important is because there's no more time zones, right? You're not just having meetings with people around the world at different hours of the day. You're having meetings with people across the galaxy and in different, so messages will come across and they could be days old. We'll have to look at how we figure out the whole speed of light interplanetary communication time lapse. That's going to be interesting. But we're going to be having communications that way as well. So time zones doesn't matter anymore. You're on or you're off and you book it in, right? But because shit's hitting the fan at this guy's place of work, he skips these sleep cycles. And he skips too many. And he has a health breakdown. Okay? And I'm saying we haven't fully finalized that, but I think maybe he. But so that's it's kind of critical. That sleep aspect is critical to the story. And then really that in the future, and we talked a little bit about the medical side of things, is we've reached a point, and this is really interesting because it's about, a series of pandemics that, viruses have now mutated, and you can see where today is a reality starting point for this. Series of mutations drove us further and further into this isolation, into this technological advancement, and then where it got so heavily burdened on the medical system that if you didn't follow the medical process, that's your choice, but you don't get covered.
Yeah. How are you guys with a dystopian aspect where there's communities where it's if you're going to go and live medical free, then you actually have to move upstate? Sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that those subcultures exist, right? This character, we already said, well, he's pretty well off. He's going to kind of live in a bit of a high castle. But yeah, we should acknowledge that there's the fringes of society, right? Where, maybe people don't have, or they refuse to connect into the virtual world, or they refuse to get inoculated, or whatever. And we can kind of play on that later, right? Maybe our character has to interact with those characters in some fashion, and we see some cultures colliding in some way. I think that could be super interesting. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think we're imagining a perfect future. I think it's going to be a little messy.
Well, what I want to think about traveling and vacations for a minute, right? So I can parachute into a new culture and play pretend, right? If I get on a plane and go to Bangkok or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing changed about my identity, but we generally, as a rule, humans sort of rule is that as we travel the world and experience different cultures, it's actually enriching. So it's really weird and not compatible to me why the ideological imprints actually start to cause abrasions. I would speculate that it's largely because Kate says that this is how your community has to be, and there's this forceful applied sort of piece on that. And so what I'm proposing for you guys on this in terms of little microcosms communities is to say that there is a community with an economic system like such and such over here, and there's one with one over here, and then there's just like we plan a vacation. We go, well, I want to go do R&R. I'd like this kind of vacation. Then I go and kind of pick where I want to go. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here to describe this, at least to the juxtapositions on cultures, right? And so then by matter of choice, the person, the character, the protagonist can go, whichever way. And I have to bring up something about the male-female thing, okay?
Yeah.
So there's another option where we never define it, right? So that's...
Ooh, gender neutral!
Yeah. So, there is the real reality that's a popular conversation right now. Are we ambulance chasers and headline guys? It doesn't matter. We're here to have a logical conversation about whether or not that is something that we want to articulate the narrative around.
Yeah,
right? So what we ask ourselves is either what's at stake if we do that? And so could we say, arguably, that if we stay gender neutral, that at least the traditional forms of imagined relationships, right, I guess, are not, some of the cliches that we can fall into, like romance and stuff like this, right? I'm not saying they wouldn't exist in this other sort of relationship, but the flavor of them would be different. And so whether or not we want to develop and make that part of the narrative, that's, I think, how you have to think about it.
So I really, really like that. And I'm going to tell you why, because right now we're in this place where the world is discovering that we're not just binary, right? We're not just one or the other. There's all spectrums of gender association. And I think as we mature and we grow over the next 600 years, it'll really become super irrelevant. You know what I mean? Like everybody will just, be kind of, it's just not going to be a conversation anymore.
Okay.
And so I really like that idea. I don't know, Adam.
Non-gender specific protagonist, right?
The only thought I had is, males and females have different strengths, right? Like speaking on broad terms. So if we were to get into some of the kind of leadership styles and strengths that a male character might bring versus a female character, and kind of like versus like emotions probably would be a huge one, right? Yes.
Hold on, I got a question for you.
Yes.
Hold on. Okay. Do women and men have significantly different strengths because of the gender association that we have put upon them, or are they born with those strengths?
Well,
yes. Yeah.
Dan?
Gentlemen in the front.
It's your book. It honestly is, but right, for somebody that would raise their hand from a biological standpoint, I would say that we want to be careful to make sure we iron this out really carefully. This is a very important claim, right? Is that women tend to have are less risky, okay, and tend towards more communal type of activity, okay?
Right. Wait, you say tend. Do you mean because there's a biological chemical makeup in their DNA that tells them that? Or do you say tend to because that's how they've been raised with our society's pressures upon them?
Right. I'm going to make the assumption that it is actually biological. And so the quote unquote evidence that I have for that is how we watch like other primate tribes, right? And so typically you have to think about what happens is that the males compete for the females, right? And so the feminist trap here is to say, I don't want to be a prize. That's not the point. Biologically, men compete amongst themselves for women's attention, right? And ultimately women are the ones that select the men. right? We might think it might be the other way around. Unilever might be doing ad campaigns for like soap and stuff like that, but quite honestly, like, like men are trying to get there to the woman, right? Biologically, right? This is kind of the idea.
See it across multiple species, fair.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So to what extent does culture override those sort of underlying sort of tendencies? And not saying that every single human being has those exact kinds of tendencies. But what happens with the graph that you see behind you on the ENTA branding is that we can say for the most part, and I don't know what percentage of the population, but the one that's opened the door for the phylogenetic chain to open up to get to where we biologically are today, it consists of those types of propagations, right? Would you agree with that?
Okay.
Oh, well, wait a minute. We should pause on that because there's a, if we were drawing a cartoon, there would be like a question bubble that just popped up there, right on top of your head.
Yeah, you can edit that in later if you want.
What's he talking about?
All I'm saying, like, you want to talk about, a node on a scale of strengths for gender based off of biological. We've significantly amplified it. Would it even be through society's expectations of gender roles? Would it even be a blip on the radar,
right,
if we didn't?
Okay, then here's the thing.
And one of the species is not recognizing male female, right? At what point? So like, as we realize that it's not male, like female, and that we're not binary, right? We're not one or the other. Or we're not, there's so much more to the spectrum. Like no other species is having that conscious evaluation either. They're just living by instinct. So what does it look like 600 years from now when we've accepted the fact that we're much more complex?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think we be a little bit careful here, because if we make things too different, then it's a little bit unrelatable. So I think we got to consider, rather than argue, or not argue, but like have to decide philosophically one way or another, nature, nurture, I think we want to say, what do we want to comment on relationships in a business or in a community or whatever? And male-female relationships are among the most interesting. When you watch a movie, read a book, or whatever, the dynamics, interactions between the two are probably the most relatable and kind of the most, they help move the story forward, and they help make the character likable, and they help kind of define the values of that person. And
right,
so
is it the male-female relationship because that's what you resonate with?
Maybe.
Right? Like there's a whole like series on Netflix under gay, lesbian, and etc.
Sure.
Right? And the whole reason that exists is because it relates to the people that see the world in that lens and that operate under that. Like, so, I mean, here's the problem is we didn't first figure out what is the mechanism for us to fight out disagreements. So, like, we're not going to do Muay Thai because I can't fight Adam.
Well, I don't think it's being overruling. I'm just saying, do we want to make a comment on leadership in terms of male and female? Because I think there's definitely a whole endless conversation probably about diversity and increasing the female leadership in the workplace, and kind of the boys club. Absolutely. And all this kind of stuff. And so my question to you then is...
But do you think in 600 years it's going to be fixed?
That's assuming there's a problem. I mean, there's a problem. See how I just... No. That totally opens it up, the whole thing. But here's the thing. We are now 5 minutes. It's almost the perfect time to pull the plug. The reason is because this will be the series for the next topic of conversation. It's a great, this is not something that's going to go away. But I do think that we're going to have to really understand how we're going to unweave that narrative, right? Whether it's from a gender neutral sort of standpoint, or whether it moves back to more of a traditional, type of reality, right? And I think that's really important. Right now, I'm on the fence with either one, because I think the story can be told in both ways.
And I think if done well and thoughtfully, you could, let's say you created a future where some of these biases have kind of gone away, and by commenting on that and contrasting that to the present day, you are in fact making the statement maybe that you want to make, right? I do think we need to acknowledge that there are physical differences, and therefore there has to be some sort of difference, and where that line is maybe is where we need to figure out.
I don't know. We got to pick this up next time. I've got a ton to say on this, and I think this is exactly like a really critical topic, because we could even break that one down. If we're engineering humans and giving them, because we're no longer doing natural birth anymore, and you're able to adjust their traits.
I say we do it this way. We actually give men the ovaries, and women get, they get to be the fearless leaders, and we just, we surrender and relegate to the matriarchy. It's about fucking women. This is you just go so over the top that the reader's like, are they making fun of this?
Well, you could take a stance,
it's like just so out there that it's like, but then how do then it becomes a bit of a satire, science fiction.
You could take like a Gattaca approach, right?
Yeah.
Where you're assigning traits.
Go. That's 12 o'clock. We have
Okay.
the alarm bell is meant.
Okay.
Okay.
Say goodbye.
Till next time.
Ooh, this is fun.
I didn't do it. I didn't do the. Oh no, I did do it. Hold on.